Just answer the first question in regard to the example of Edwards and why Puritans are painted in a certain way as they are, as these rough, angry, hateful people walking around in long black garbs with white wigs, disrupting every kid's birthday party in the town. And I think that's because
popping balloons.
Yeah, exactly. Tar and feathering everybody, having fun. But if you take the example of Jonathan Edwards, for instance, the only thing that the mass population know about Edwards, if they've even heard of Edwards, is his sermon, as you've said, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And I remember in high school reading that sermon in a literature book as early American literature. And it wasn't until college, as I began to look into Edwards, that I found that particular sermon was not typical of his pastoral and preaching ministry at all. In fact, it was quite untypical of Edwards. Edwards' writings, his whole corpus is filled with joy and love and grace and beauty and perfection, and something that once you begin reading, your affections just begin to bubble over in worship to God. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is not typical Edwards. And so I think through the years, what we've done is we've taken these small parts of the Puritans and picked them apart and then judged the whole movement based on these austere, terrible, dark, kind of hateful genres that we read. And that's not at all what the Puritan movement is. If anything, and I think we can have, John Piper to thank as much as anyone for this, and Banner of Truth and others who have kind of uncovered the Puritans. The Puritans are about joy. Edwards is walking through the forest singing songs and making up hymns as he goes. He's not popping little kids' balloons. He's not breaking up, parties. He's sitting on his rooftop as a storm approaches, making up hymns in worship to God. He's riding on his horse, into town as a loving pastor. And we don't ride on Edwards, but Edwards is, it can be argued Edwards is not even a Puritan. But the men and women that we ride on, John Eliot, for instance, who I rode on in American Puritans, he was a pastor for 40-some years and translated the whole Bible into the Native American Algonquin language. This, guys, has to be love overflowing in missionary and pastoral efforts. That's all it can be. These are not hateful guys. These are guys and women, of course, I'm including those as well, who love the Lord, who have a joy for Christ, who have a desire to expand his kingdom. And I could go on, but that's somewhat of my observance of how we have painted the Puritans.
Yeah, so it's kind of like if in 100 years we were to have textbooks on John MacArthur, and the only sermon they included was when he said, "Go home to Bethmore."
Exactly. Yeah.
Caricature. Yeah.
We tend to want to demonize, people in theology that we don't agree with. To piggyback on what Dustin was talking about with why we do this to them, probably the biggest transgression historically is the Salem witch trials. They have, again, you have the Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne view of, Cotton Mather, sort of standing there, laughing menacingly as they're hanging witches. And it's like, he wasn't even at the trials. I mean, that's just not history. So, that's probably one of the biggest, dust ups I think that's come through, and it's been there for 300 years. People actually go to school and think that these things actually happen, and they're wildly exaggerated. And we actually make an argument for this in the book, where the reason, and scholars have redeemed this, but the reason that they were maligned so badly is because it was an opposing movement, a liberal movement, Unitarian movement that was going through and trying to basically supplant Congregationalism and Reformed theology and elder Congregationalism. So it was a movement to usurp them. And how do you destroy a movement? Well, you destroy the reputation of people that are in it. So you can paint them out to be terrible people. And that's what leftism does even now. Liberalism does that now.
Witch hunt.
It's just that's true. I mean, it's true. I mean, we hear about it all the time, and that's things haven't changed in 300 years, and this is the same thing. So all we're doing now is we're seeing the rotten fruit of slandering a person and maligning their character. And so part of our job, I think, is to try to at least tell the truth about the events. As terrible as these things are, tell the truth about them and try to see things for what they really are.